Well, out here in the DMV, we're now less than a week from Election Day in the V part of that. Virginia and Terry McAuliffe and Glenn Youngkin are locked in what appears to be a dead heat. Both candidates earned the support of 48% of voters in the latest poll from Emerson University, meaning who becomes governor could come down to a photo finish.
President Biden traveled to the Commonwealth Tuesday night to stump for McAuliffe, officially throwing his full weight into the race. According to Politico, the president is tying his and the Democratic Party's 2022 and 24 fortunes to what goes down at the polls next Tuesday. Here's some footage from that rally.
Virginia, you know Terry. You know his record. He was a great governor. If you re-elect him again, he'll be another 4 years as a great governor. But look, how well do you know Terry's opponent? Well, just remember this. I ran against Donald Trump. And Terry is running against an acolyte of Donald Trump. Terry's opponent has made all of his private pledges of loyalty to Donald Trump. But what's really interesting to me, he won't stand next to Donald Trump now that the campaign's on. Think about it. He won't allow Donald Trump to campaign for him in this state. And he's willing to pledge his loyalty to Trump in private. Why not in public? What's he trying to hide? Is there a problem with Trump being here? Is he embarrassed?
Here to discuss the nail-biter race is host of Bad Faith Podcast and former press secretary for the Sanders campaign, Briahna Joy Gray. Welcome, Briahna.
Thank you, Ryan.
So what do you think? Is the Biden magic all that Terry McAuliffe needed in Virginia?
You know, setting me up with that video of that little dance scene, I feel like that's fate, Ryan. I feel like that's fate. Look, I don't know why Democrats would choose to make this a referendum on the status of the party when the polls are what they are and the race is so close. And the constant references to Trump have the air of an older high school athlete who's still living in the glory days. Like, are we still framing our value only in the terms of someone who hasn't been in the White House in almost a year at this point? You know, we are still in the middle of an economic crisis. I know that nobody on the Hill wants to talk about it because that would be perceived as a referendum on how well Joe Biden has done to get us out of it. But the idea that people are still struggling in really meaningful ways and the entire locus of the conversation is still on Donald Trump is rather dispiriting, especially when you look at the poll numbers with respect to groups that have traditionally done well for Democrats. We're talking, you know, white college-age voters are going Republican, going for Youngkin. We're talking Hispanic voters are basically a 50-50 split in the state. And so I would hope that people would start to ask, what is it that voters substantively want and pitch themselves on those grounds, as opposed to the grounds of who is or is not willing to stand next to Donald Trump at a podium.
Yeah, I agree completely with that. I think it's a really great point, and it is confounding that Democrats have chosen to make this a national referendum when, in fact, actually, I think the fact that they're sort of like obsessed with talking about Donald Trump in the high school-esque way that you mentioned reflects their sort of uneasiness with using Biden's success so far in office as a referendum in the middle of an economic crisis. So if Terry McAuliffe skates by with the win, you know, maybe it provides a much-needed boost to what has been a tough few months for Democrats. A new poll from the National Republican Congressional Committee shows the GOP with a 3-point lead over Democrats in the hypothetical ballots across 85 battleground congressional districts. So, Briahna, do those numbers actually just sort of prove your point that there's no reason to be making a national referendum out of a state race that is very much a state race? This is a race about Virginia.
Yeah, I mean, I don't get it. I'm sorry, I just don't get it. I feel like I'm going to start pulling my hair out at any moment. I'm so at the end of my rope. Look, we just had on Bad Faith Podcast, Ro Khanna, to have a conversation about the state of the infrastructure bills. And one of the key questions that needs to be raised is, are you going to get enough done in these bills to sell the general public on the idea that Democrats actually do something, that electing Democrats is actually worthwhile, that it's not the case, as it was last year, that will harangue you and push you and pressure you to vote, promising $2,000 checks, the moon, the stars, student debt cancellation, marijuana legalization. And even though much of that is in the realm of Joe Biden's ability through executive order. It has nothing to do with Manchin, Sinema, or any of the other corporate obstructionists in the Democratic Party. There's still no action on those metrics. And honestly, the answers that are coming out of progressives and others in the Congress are really unsatisfying. And it's not surprising to me that you're now seeing videos of voters saying they will never vote for a Democrat again because of the failed promises of last year.
I feel like the answer to the question of what on earth they're thinking must just be straight partisanship, and that they're banking on the fact that there will be enough vote blue no matter who people in Virginia to inch past Youngkin at the very end. I think back to 2014, which was an absolutely brutal year for Democrats nationwide. Ebola, ISIS, they lost the Senate, which cost them the Supreme Court seat as a result, or at least one. And Mark Warner was up for re-election in Virginia, and he eked out a win because the state is just so blue. He only won by less than a point. I think it was like 20,000 votes or something like that. But he still won. So if McAuliffe wins, I think it would be that type of a victory, like with massive headwinds up against Democrats, but just so many partisan Democrats willing to just go out, cast their ballot, that he wins by less than a point or something like that. I mean, do you think that? And Virginia is a particularly vote blue no matter who because of the kind of the bureaucratic element in Northern Virginia. Like you have a huge population of college-educated federal government-employed Democrats in the state. Do you think it's enough that he'll eke this out?
Look, I don't know. I saw a poll that showed that, for example, only 75% of Democrats were planning to vote. 75% of Black voters were planning to vote for McAuliffe. I also saw the Debt Collective circulating a poll that said 40% of Black voters say that they will sit out the next election if there's no student debt cancellation. I see numbers like this, right? I see a cohort that usually votes overwhelmingly for Democrats, that Democrats historically need to get upwards of 90% of to win at least in national elections, right? I see 25% on the table in a state with a substantial Black population. I see that population clamoring for something Joe Biden can do for an executive order that would actually perhaps inject enthusiasm into a race. And I see the Democrats not doing that, and instead Joe Biden getting up at the pulpit and saying exactly what he did in the general election, which is, Joe, Terry, his record. Well, I think the problem is that too many people do know what Democrats do and don't do. And they're frustrated, and that's why they might choose to stay home. And at very least, that's why you're seeing these poll numbers so close right now.
So, and just to wrap that up, I think there's another great point. And Terry McAuliffe is like a case study he's the quintessential Democratic establishment creature. And so I wonder if you think the fact that Democrats do seem eager to make this a national referendum, what's happening in Virginia, even though it's way closer than it should be, given how deep blue the state is, to Ryan's point, does that reflect just the same level of incompetence and out of touch, like the same way that Democrats on a national level are out of touch? Like, do they actually think this Trump obsession and the Joe obsession is a good national strategy? Is that what we're learning here from how they're treating Virginia?
I don't know, man. Sometimes I think that they just don't have any other options, right? If you have two corporate parties, both of whom are beholden to corporate interests, well, Republicans, the framing that they have adopted and pitched to their voters for years is a lot more in sync with a plutocracy, right? If their base believes that trickle-down economics works, their base believes that if we have tax cuts for the rich, somehow it's going to benefit them. So they don't have their lines crossed as much as Democrats do. Their tongue isn't so tied. Democrats have to pretend to want to do things for good people, but have to figure out a way to not actually deliver because those things are against the interest of their donor base, right? So at the end of the day, what can you do? You can talk in vague platitudes. You can make gestures to certain identity politics wars or culture wars. But at the end of the day, Democrats can't deliver because they're paid not to. And what I'm looking forward to is this being a referendum on the fact that moderate Dems just can't win. My golly, is this going to be the end of third way politics? Because we know if this was a progressive in this position, there would be everybody on the cable news networks from now until the end of time waxing philosophical about how this is just proof positive that progressive politics can't make it in America, and that we really need a moderate to push us through.
Well, Briahna, thank you so much for joining us.
Of course. It's always a pleasure.
And fun fact, Mark Warner and Terry McAuliffe were junior staffers together at the DNC on the fundraising team in the early 1980s.
That does not count
at it for a very long time.
That's not a fun
Very fun.
factor.
super fun. I think they sat right next to each other or something weird. Anyway, we will have more Rising for you right after this.